It's been a year since the Game of Thrones Season 8 finale aired on HBO, and the series came to its final conclusion. Think what you might about the series as a whole, but the design was extraordinary, in particular, the costume design by Michelle Clapton. But some of us might have been longing to see that what-if costume, the ones that might have been in the original source material by George R.R. Martin that never made it to screen, or just the what-if type costumes had the story gone in a different direction. Once again, I turned to social media to find out what costumes you long to see in the show. I did a poll on both my channel and on Twitter asking the question, if you could have designed the costumes for Game of Thrones, what costumes would you have included during the 8 seasons? So let's have some fun with this. Using some incredible Game of Thrones concept art, many of them on Deviant Art, along with some haute couture fashions and a bit of Photoshop thrown in for good measure, here are 10 Game of Thrones costumes you wish were in the show. Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers. Costume designer Michelle Clapton has said that early in her design process, the showrunners Dave and Dan felt that the series should not be fantastical like the book, so beyond the sigils and house colors, the design team were setting out on their own path. Clapton used the scripts as her roadmap and not the descriptions of the costumes provided in the original source material. So the green of Loras' jousting shield, for instance, it's a muted blue-green, and his mail is gold instead of the standard silver mentioned in the book. Westeros.org actually points out that Loras' helm looks similar to an onion bulb, although I think the intention was for it to look like an oversized rosebud or flower bud. In the book Game of Thrones, it's mentioned that Loras' silver armor is decorated with sapphires and twining black vines, and he wears a cloak of forget-me-not sewn to a heavy woolen cape. In Clash of Kings, it's described that Loras' armor is made in King's Landing by master armorer and blacksmith Tobo Mott. He also uses silver mail and a green shield, while golden roses decorate the crest of his helm. Renly Baratheon, court costumes and armor. In the book Game of Thrones, Renly wears expensive attire, such as a green velvet doublet embroidered with golden stags. Over the doublet he fastens a half cape of golden cloth with an emerald brooch like the one we see here in this painting. Ned Stark tells Renly that he is the very image of his brother Robert, while Littlefinger comments that he is a better dressed version, spending more on clothing than half the ladies in the court. In Clash of Kings, from Catelyn Stark's POV chapter, she thinks, "Small wonder the lords gather around him with such fervor. She thought, he is Robert come again." Renly was handsome as Robert had been handsome, long of limb and broad of shoulder, with the same coal-black hair, fine and straight, the same deep blue eyes, the same easy smile. Renly tells Catelyn, "Why the oldest son and not the best fitted? The crown will suit me as it never suited Robert and would not suit Stannis." But in the show, perhaps in keeping with the decision to cast Gethin Anthony, Clapton went in another, more earthy direction. She created a leather doublet akin to Robert's boiled leather look hunting attire. Regarding Renly's armor, in A Clash of Kings, he has a magnificent suit of armor, but it's of a deep forest green color. The antler crown is said to be a golden circlet made to look like roses, with a stag's head at the front made of green jade with golden eyes and antlers, uniting Baratheon and Tyrell colors and symbols. In this illustration, Renly's emerald green armor with the matching helm is adorned with a pair of golden antlers, which along with the suit of armor was made by master armorer Tobo Mott. Michelle Clapton said in her new book, Game of Thrones, The Costumes, "I didn't feel the need to dress Renly in Baratheon colors, though he does wear some gold." She said that Renly's brigandine is a studded gray-green leather tunic covered with green velvet. But as you can see here, the green doesn't read much, looking more like taupe. The small bit of emerald green that we see is in his cravat worn around his neck. The emerald green is also picked up in Marjorie's scarf, like we see here. Sansa Winterfell. This is likely going to be a bit contentious, perhaps more my own personal preference, but I would have loved to have seen a departure from Sansa's dark gray to black gothic costumes that she came to be known for in Winterfell, and in favor of hues more like mauve, soft grays, and blues. We could go the traditional route, with a medieval-inspired silhouette made from multiple layers of gorgeous velvets, silks, brocades, and embroidered woolens. Or move into some more contemporary costume design, like we see with the Jean-Paul Gaultier gown, topped with a rigid clear corset with riveted silver strips. Daenerys Targaryen Tokar. Taken directly from the books, A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons, Dany wears variations of the tokar, a long, loose, shapeless piece of silk or linen cloth that is worn in Giscari cities by the wealthy and the good maesters. The tokar is akin to a Greek himation, Roman toga, or the Southeast sari. From Dany's POV chapter, she thinks that the tokar was not a garment meant for any man who had to work. The tokar was a master's garment, a sign of wealth and power. In A Dance with Dragons, it's mentioned that Dany owns a blue tokar. Michelle Clapton abandoned this costume among others like it, stating, "We took the sigils, but we didn't stick closely to the descriptions of the costumes. Instead, she went with more of an Egyptian and South Asian mashup, like with the silhouette that we saw in seasons 4 and 5. In A Dance with Dragons, Dany wants to ban the tokar after her successful siege of Meereen. The Green Grace, however, tells Daenerys that the Mother of Dragons must don the tokar or be forever hated. In The Wolves of Westeros, or a gown of Moorish lace, your radiance shall forever remain a stranger amongst us, a grotesque outlander, a barbarian conqueror. Meereen's queen must be a lady of old Guise. Throughout A Storm of Swords, it's mentioned that Dany has an assortment of tokars, including a red silk, silver fringe, gold fringe, and one of plain fringe. Adding to her closet of tokars, Dany dons one of sheer white linen fringed with gold tassels and a tokar of white silk fringed with baby pearl. And as well, a yellow silk tokar with pearls. And in A Dance with Dragons, Dany wears a green silk tokar trimmed with Moorish lace fringe. Speaking of Moorish lace, as a side note, I would have loved to have seen some of it in the show because for some reason the lace was never used on any of the costumes. Said to be the most expensive lace in the world, perhaps Moorish lace looks like Lever's lace, sometimes called Calais lace. It's expensive to make because there's up to 32 processes involved in designing and producing a run of Lever's lace. Chantilly lace, often used in bridal and lingerie, is a type of Lever's lace that requires threads to later be hand-clipped. Lyanna Stark Blue Roses. We saw Lyanna Stark, younger sister of Ned and Benjen Stark, in a series of flashbacks in the HBO series Game of Thrones. First as a child in Season 6 and then later as an adult in Seasons 6 and 7. But there was one flashback that many fans craved for and never got. The tourney at Harrenhal, where Prince Rhaegar presented a wreath of rare blue winter roses to Lyanna, placing it in her lap with the tip of his lance, thereby making her the queen of love and beauty. In the book Game of Thrones, Ned remembers Lyanna as a child woman of surpassing loveliness. During the feast at Harrenhal, held to celebrate the start of the tourney, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, a noted musician, performed a sad and beautiful song that made Lyanna weep. Lyanna is often depicted in cool, stark tones, in blues and grays, like that of a direwolf from the family crest. And like all of the men and women in her house, she's often wrapped in a long cloak with a fur wolf pelt collar on her shoulders. It's also written in Game of Thrones that Lyanna loved the scent of winter roses. And at the end of Robert's rebellion, Ned found Lyanna inside the Tower of Joy in a bed of blood, dying in a room that smelled of blood and roses. Daenerys Targaryen read. By the time Game of Thrones wrapped up in Season 8, I really wanted to see Dany in a drop-dead gorgeous red gown, one befitting a queen, perhaps if there had been a coronation or a wedding, or, even just for fun. I'm not going to say that I feel cheated because Michelle Clapton was clearly heading in another direction with this, moving Dany more toward a masculine Targaryen silhouette. And that, along with the complete shutting down of color in Season 8, her in steely grays, oxidized blood red and black, there was really no opportunity for that outfit. The red, of course, comes from the Targaryen sigil, which is, after all, a red three-headed dragon on a black field. Viewer Jose Marcado wrote, I really wanted a costume for Dany that screamed fire and blood, but we never really got it. And then Inactive wrote on Twitter that, in my own headcanon, Jon and Dany married in Winterfell, her in white furs and deep blood red velvet and silks with silver adornments. There are lots of stunning haute couture gowns that I could imagine Dany wearing, but the one that really tugs at me is this gown by Chinese couturier Wu Pei from the aptly named collection Legend of the Dragon. Through her 2012 collection, Pei explores her multiple feelings to show the extraordinary beauty of dragons, their charm, postures, and souls. Euron Valyrian armor. Like the casting of Renly Baratheon, the casting of Euron Greyjoy with Pilo Asbeck in the HBO series was perplexing to many of the fans. In the books, Euron is described as pale and handsome with black hair and a dark beard. He wears a patch over his left eye and is nicknamed Crow's Eye. According to Theon, the patch conceals a black eye shining with malice. His right eye is as blue as summer sky and is regarded as his smiling eye. In addition, his lips are a pale blue due to his propensity to drink shade of the evening. Prior to sailing the Redwind Fleet and the ships of House Hightower, Euron's brother Aeron Greyjoy sees him clad in Valyrian steel armor, likely looted while pillaging the ruins of a Dragonlord family nobler. According to Game of Thrones Wiki, while Valyrian steel swords are rare in Westeros, Valyrian steel armors are even rarer. Euron Greyjoy is the only known person in Westeros who possesses such armor. So in the show, Euron wears the typical Greyjoy armor consisting of a steel cuirass covered in a layer of leather, which was meant to protect the steel from the salt water. But this wouldn't be necessary with Valyrian steel, one of the strongest allies known in the Game of Thrones universe. Because according to George R.R. Martin, he said, Valyrian steel is a fantasy metal, which means it has magical characteristics and magic plays a role in its forging. Valyrian steel was always costly, but it became considerably more so when there was no more Valyria and the secret of its making were lost. According to the UK Telegraph, Valyrian steel appears to have been inspired by Damascus steel. Developed in India and the Middle East, Damascus steel was known for its super strong, super sharp qualities and for its distinctive rippled surface. But the specific temperature and the techniques needed to make it were lost at some point in the 18th century. Daenerys' crown. In the book A Clash of Kings, Daenerys is given a crown by the Tourmaline Brotherhood, a powerful guild of merchant princes within Qarth. The crown is described as wrought in the shape of a three-headed dragon. The coils are yellow gold, the wings silver, and the heads carved from jade, ivory, and onyx. Not following the book logic, Michelle Clapton has stated in multiple interviews that the reason that Dany doesn't wear a crown in the HBO series is that she didn't actually earn it. So instead, Clapton gave her a chain of intent with a three-headed dragon. To be honest, I never really bought Clapton's argument here. There have been many kings and queens that have worn a crown that never actually earned it, like Cersei, for example. So I'd argue that Dany did indeed earn it with her multiple conquests. I feel that this is one example of where the show doesn't follow its own rules. Upon her arrival at Dragonstone, that would have been the time where Dany could have worn her new crown, perhaps a design of her own choosing, or if the story had gone in another direction, Jon could have been the one to have crowned her during her coronation. Jon Snow, Dragon Armor. Bex and Torkel wrote, "Honestly, I would have loved to have seen Jon in Targaryen and Stark-influenced armor." While Koozie Creations wrote on Twitter that, "I also would have loved to see Jon in Targaryen armor. They made such a huge fuss about his Targaryen heritage in Season 8. This is supposing that the story had gone in another direction, but it would have been really cool to see Jon wearing some iteration of Rhaegar's armor, whether it included embossed dragons or scales, an incorporation of the three-headed dragon sigil, or some of the red and black from the Targaryen sigil. Or even a mashup of his Stark armor with Targaryen nods. This armor depicted here in this portrait of Jon Snow, for instance, is more subtle, with the torso of the armor having the texture of scales, while his cloak is in a deep maroon red. Daenerys and Drogon in armor. In my poll, Daenerys and Drogon in armor was by far the most popular choice that you would have liked to have seen in Game of Thrones. And if you've watched some of my Game of Thrones costume videos, you'll probably know that besides the lack of helmets and hats on the actors, this was likely my biggest gripe. One of my viewers, A Girl Has No Name, wrote that she wanted to see badass Targaryen flying armor for Dany, while Bera Samayova stated that she could actually visualize the costumes, writing, "I can only imagine the metalwork, all rubies and dragon scales." JMK writes on Twitter that, "In my imaginary version, Dany wears simple, elegant black armor with red stripes over the shoulders, like Drogo wore, silver accents, and a wolf pelt over the shoulders with a cloak Stark style." But this would have been all the more amazing had Drogon been fashioned in a type of matching armor to Dany's own. Thank you to all the amazing artists featured in this video. I'll leave links to their works in the description below if you guys want to check it out. And I'll be bringing you more Game of Thrones videos in the coming months. But in the meantime, check out my best Game of Thrones women's costumes video. Thank you for spending time with me. I'll see you in the next video.